Do you remember old Katarina?
Okay.
Yeah, that one. If you've ever been on the receiving end of a Katarina pentakill, you know the feeling. 1 second your team's grouped up doing fine, the next you're watching grey screens whilst daggers rain from the sky. But how those daggers find you has changed dramatically over the years. Old Katarina was a button mashing reset machine, face rolling through teamfights and a blur of instant resets. New Katarina is a more methodical assassin, planning 3 steps ahead and setting up dagger chains before the fight even begins. Both versions are equally lethal, but how they play in practice is quite different. Her journey from release champion to modern design spans 3 distinct versions, 2 complete gameplay reworks, and more than 15 years of evolution. This is Katarina the Sinister Blade. We're starting off in October 2009, the year when League of Legends released, and back then it had 40 champions, a number that would explode rapidly as Riot scrambled to establish their new game in the competitive MOBA market. During 2010 and 11, Riot released 24 champions each year, bringing the total roster to over 80 champions by the end of 2011. This breakneck release schedule meant that champions were designed quickly. They had to be, often with simpler kits that were straightforward and prioritized clarity over complexity. Early League was so different, and the game and its players were finding out just what a MOBA could really be. And into this ever-expanding roster arrived Katarina. She was released in the same patch alongside Corki, and from day one she was classified as an assassin mage, a manaless, cooldown-based champion built around capitalizing on kills to unleash devastating resets. And her original kit on day one established her core identity that would define her basically forever. Her passive in the heart of Katarina has always been around the resets, and even back then this was true. The first version of her passive, Veracity, made it so if an enemy champion died within 15 seconds of being damaged by Katarina, she would gain 50 gold and her other cooldowns were reduced by 20 seconds. This was the foundation of her reset mechanic, rewarding you cleaning up and snowballing through a fight, but it had a much looser trigger condition than modern League players may expect. Her Q was Bouncing Blade, where she threw a dagger that bounced between multiple targets, dealing magic damage equal to her total attack damage plus a bonus amount to the primary target. It would also have a 15% damage drop off with each subsequent bounce. You should also know in this first version the number of bounces also scaled with ability level. At early ranks it only bounced a few times, scaling up dramatically as the ability leveled. This was her primary poking and wave clear tool, though its damage curve made early ranks feel really weak. Her W was completely different and it was called Killer Instincts. This had both an active and a passive component. The passive granted Katarina stacking attack speed each time she consecutively hit the same target. An odd mechanic for an ability-based assassin, but we'll get on to what Riot was thinking here soon. The active modified her next basic ability. It made Bouncing Blade deal full damage to all targets and apply a healing reduction, or it gave Shumpo an increased dodge chance for 3 seconds. So this toggle style required players to think ahead about which type of enhancement they needed. Her E, Shumpo, made her instantly blink to a target's location, dealing magic damage if the target was an enemy. This was her primary mobility tool and gap closer, allowing her to get into the fight easily. And most importantly, back then you could even target wards with this ability. Finally, her ultimate Death Lotus made her channel for 3 seconds, throwing daggers at nearby enemies. She would hit 1 champion for each rank of the ability. So at level 6 and rank 1, Death Lotus was only hitting 1 champion, even if you were spinning next to 2. On top of that, the damage it dealt scaled with either your highest stat out of your AD or AP, which meant alongside her Q scaling with 100% bonus AD, you really had to lock into either choosing AP or AD on this first version of Kat. And even during this first version of Katarina's kit, she was the definition of feast or famine. If she secured kills early and snowball, she could dominate teamfights by chaining together resets and cleaning up wounded enemies. If she fell behind, she became a complete liability. Her damage fell off without items and gold support, and her channeled ultimate has always made her very vulnerable in teamfights. Her manaless design meant she never ran out of resources in lane, but she paid for for it with a really weak early game laning phase. Bouncing Blade scaling with levels forced her to lane super passively until she could level this ability up several times, and her attack speed steroid on Killer Instinct's passive just felt awkward to use and weird. Katarina wanted to burst enemies with abilities, not just auto-attack them down. Itemization on Katarina was also confusing at best. Her Q did 100% of her AD and a flat amount as magic damage, and her ult scaled off AD or AP, whichever was highest. She clearly wanted to build as a hybrid, but at the same time her kit scaling was holding her back from being able to dish out tons of damage. In fact, when Katarina first released, items like Hextech Gunblade didn't even exist within the game yet. So it really was you are building AD or AP, but Katarina didn't stay in this original state for too long before Riot started to change things around. The first change was made to Killer Instinct's passive effect. Instead of giving attack speed with consecutive hits, it would now give you bonus AD instead. And given her scaling back then, this does make more sense. At least you're getting some value out of your auto attacks. But even still, it just didn't feel like it really made sense. And in April of 2010, Riot changed Killer Instinct's passive again, and replaced it with a flat bonus damage on hit from basic attacks or abilities. This was a huge shift in dynamic because now it just added bonus damage to everything she did, instead of having this weird on hit playstyle. During this time, Shumpo also lost its dodge chance when enhanced by Killer Instincts, and now it just gained flat damage reduction instead, because Riot were gradually phasing dodge out of the game in the very early days of League. In December of 2010, Riot really started to tackle Katarina's itemization conundrum. They reduced the AD scaling on Bouncing Blade, but now also gave it a 35% AP ratio, and by this point in time, Hextech Gunblade did exist, and it was really perfect for her. On top of that, Death Lotus saw huge changes. Now instead of scaling off either AD or AP, it scaled off both of these values combined. On top of that, it also hit up to 3 targets at the same time at all ranks, as well as the 3 closest targets, not just random targets. This patch solved Katarina's itemization problems, which had been plaguing her since release. Up to this point in time, Katarina players have been facing a problem. Is the AD build better, or is the AP build better? Well, because of this patch, the answer would turn out to be, well, you can build a bit of both really, and that's something that's remained true with her kit for a long time to come. All of these early changes streamline Katarina's kit. They remove the awkward attack speed and on-hit AD mechanics, and her core identity remained intact, a reset-based cleanup champion who lived and died by her ability to secure kills in teamfights. Over the next 2 years, Katarina would receive numerous tweaks and quality of life changes, but her fundamental design stayed largely the same. And though Riot kept trying to buff and nerf her abilities to find the correct balance for her, she was just problematic. Either she was doing nothing in a game or completely taking them over. By 2012, it was clear that just changing the numbers wasn't going to be enough. Katarina's kit had fundamental issues that numbers alone couldn't solve, and Riot were ready to give her first mini rework. In August of 2012, Katarina's gameplay rework hit. The announcement came from a detailed forum post from Riot, which outlined their goals: preserve her reset-based identity while making her less frustrating to play against and more skill-expressive to play as. Here's what they changed. Her passive now triggered on champion kills or assists, and this had been done a few patches ago. This meant you had to really be participating in a fight to get resets, not just have randomly hit someone with a bouncing blade 10 seconds ago and you get a cooldown reduction from it. Her Q Bouncing Blade had its AD scaling removed and AP scaling increased. On top of that, it always now bounced from the primary target to the 4 closest enemies with a 10% damage fall off per bounce. On top of that, enemies that were hit were marked for 4 seconds, and Katarina could consume these marks via basic attacks or spells to deal bonus damage. The changes on her Q were absolutely huge for Katarina. Her W Killer Instincts was also completely redesigned. It was now called Sinister Steel. This was a simple ability where Katarina would spin around and deal AoE damage to targets near her. It would also scale with her bonus AD and AP. On top of that, if she hit an enemy champion, she would gain movement speed for 1 second. It was a clean, effective ability which really tied together Katarina's kit. The movement speed gave her some wiggle room to dupe targets and outplay them, and between her Q marking things and you being able to consume that that mark with her W, Katarina now had wave clear. This is something she had been missing so badly from her original kit. So now when you started to get ahead, you could shove out waves really fast and go roam, and this has always been so important for assassins. Her E-Shumpo was largely unchanged. It was still blinking to a target and dealing damage plus your AP, but now she also gained a flat 20% damage reduction for 3 seconds whenever she used Shumpo. It didn't have to be empowered anymore because, well, Killer Instincts was gone. Her Death Lotus also saw some changes. Before it used to channel for 2.5 or 3 seconds, in this version it channeled for 2 seconds, and its maximum base damage was 600 plus 300% bonus AD and 175% AP. That amount of damage over 2 seconds was absolutely crazy when you didn't see it coming. On top of that, Riot also moved Grievous Wounds to Death Lotus during this patch too, making it even more deadly. 2012 Katarina was Kat at her fastest and most aggressive. The shortened channel time on her ultimate and the ability to gain wave clear really set up the Sinister Blade to be able to overtake games super fast. The 2012 rework definitely achieved some of its goals. The new W gave her a reliable DPS tool in teamfights and critically gave her wave clear when combined with Q's mark. The shortened ultimate channel time also made it more forgiving, but the core problems with Katarina really went completely unanswered. They just made her be able to snowball way harder with this update. She was a win more champion, or if your team couldn't set you up to succeed, she would stand there at the edge of a fight waiting for something to happen, only to never find an opportunity to go in. Perhaps more importantly, she really wasn't fun to play against. When Katarina got ahead, there was basically nothing you could do about it. She'd Shumpo onto your backline, channel her R for a bit, and then pretty much just spam E and W and absolutely sweep through your team in a few seconds. Her skill floor was relatively low. You would mash buttons, hope your team gets kills, and profit from resets. And her skill ceiling wasn't too much higher.
I'm dead. Oh my god! What the f? Why is Cat so overpowered? Why is Cat so overpowered? What the f?
Good Katarina players knew when to engage, but the actual execution was straightforward. There wasn't much depth to her beyond, I'm going to wait for the enemy team to use some CC, E onto their backline press R, and just hope they don't interrupt me before I get resets. Still, the community was split. Some players loved this version, and I can't blame them for that. She was flashy and rewarding and could absolutely hard carry games. Others absolutely despised her. She felt cheap, frustrating, and snowball dependent. And by 2016, as part of a massive assassin class update, Riot were ready to give it another go. The 2016 Assassin update was huge for the game. Riot overhauled 4 assassins with major reworks, being Katarina, Talon, Rengar, and LeBlanc, while several others received minor gameplay updates. The goal was adding more counterplay and skill expression whilst preserving core identities. And for Katarina, Riot went all in on a radical new mechanic: daggers. Here's how it worked. When Katarina used certain abilities, she would throw a dagger that would land on the ground after a brief delay. These daggers would then sit on the ground, creating a zone. Katarina could pick up the daggers by walking over them, or Shumpo to blink to them. Picking up a dagger did 2 things. It immediately dealt heavy AoE damage around her, and it reduced Shumpo's cooldown dramatically. This meant now Katarina could set up dagger chains, throwing daggers, blinking to it, throwing another dagger, blinking to that one, creating these elaborate sequences of mobility and damage. The whole point behind this mechanic was to make her a little bit more predictable in her approach. It gave opponents clear windows of counterplay. They could see where you were going to put your daggers, or they would know where they would land, and you could prepare to punish her. It also gave Katarina players a massive new skill ceiling. Good Katarinas could set up daggers, chaining mobility and being able to escape in a team fight, and it transformed her from just a button mashing reset machine into much more of a tactical assassin who had to plan her engagements. So during this rework, her passive veracity was changed quite a bit. It still had the resets from taking down enemies with kills or assists, but it also had the AoE from her daggers tacked onto it too. And in this first version, based on your level, the base damage was up to 285 damage plus 100% bonus AD and 100% AP. You better believe this first version was not very well balanced. Picking up a dagger would also massively reduce the cooldown of your Shumpo. Her Q would still bounce between multiple targets and then would leave a dagger on the floor which she could use for other abilities. Her W was changed from Sinister Steel to Preparation. Preparation tossed a dagger in the air at Katarina's location which landed on the floor shortly after. This was her main setup ability where you could Preparation, the name's very fitting, before you went into a fight and actually have a way to get out of the fight instead of just full committing every single time you press E. Her E, Shumpo, was also changed so she could target enemies, allies or daggers. And it was also during this patch that Riot removed ward jumping for Katarina, which at the time was a super controversial change. They mentioned, "We understand ward jumping is one of the best ways to identify the skilled live Katarina player, however we strongly believe there are much cooler ways for Katarina to show off." And to be honest, if you had Preparation in the game and ward jumps at the same time, she would have had a crazy amount of mobility, which didn't need an ally or enemy target to pull off. On top of that, there was another mini change which frustrated long-time Katarina players in this rework too, and that was that Shumpo's animation was altered. In the old version, she appeared to jump behind people and she went briefly untargetable. In this new version, she just blinked to their location instead. This was more of a minor annoyance that long-term Katarina players would notice, but it was a shame to lose at the same time. And her ultimate was pretty much unchanged: spin around, do tons of damage, scales with AD and AP. The real goal of the dagger system was to achieve something that the 2012 rework didn't. It made Katarina more fair and more skill intensive. For your opponents, the daggers were telegraphed. You knew what she was going to do before she did it. You could try and position away from them, you could zone Katarina off of her daggers, you could punish her when she went to pick one up. Now the feast or famine problem wasn't completely solved with her kit. Katarina will always be a snowball dependent assassin, however it was improved. You weren't just getting run over by instant resets anymore, you had chances to outplay. And for Katarina players, the skill ceiling shot through the roof with this rework. Mastering dagger placement, timing your W before engagement, chaining Shumpo resets through multiple daggers, these were skills that took many games to perfect. Katarina's one of those champions where it looks super easy when someone's great at the champion, then you try it yourself and you end up feeding for multiple games in a row. 4 years after the dagger system launched, Riot made another significant change that would define modern Katarina, adding in on-hit viability to her kit. In November of 2020, Riot made it so her passive would proc on hit effects, her E would apply on hit effects, and her R would apply on hit effects too at a 25% efficiency, on top of scaling with attack speed as well. This changed everything for Katarina. Suddenly, she could build things such as Blade of the Ruined King, Kraken Slayer or Wit's End for example. This on-hit build brought in a whole new way to experience Katarina. Fast forwarding to today, the 2016 rework is the one that stood the test of time. Katarina has received countless balance changes, nerfs when she's too strong, buffs when she falls behind, but the core dagger system is the one that we've stuck with. Her build diversity is crazy by modern standards. She has AP builds, AD builds, on-hit builds, hybrid builds. She is super flexible, though inevitably there will be one build path which is strongest on any given patch, but whenever Riot tinker with items, Katarina mains are going to experiment. Her popularity has remained pretty steady too. In solo queue she hovers between a 7 to 8% pick rate and a bit above a 10% ban rate. Players are drawn to her flashy playstyle and the satisfaction of setting up multiple kills in a fight. She's not easy to learn, but when you do, she's super rewarding. But here's the thing about successful reworks, they don't always preserve everything players loved about the original. For all the improvements the 2016 rework brought, there are people who are always going to miss the old Katarina, especially the 2012 version of her. And honestly, they have a point. The 2012 rework was just faster. She was more straightforward, more direct. There was an immediacy to her gameplay, a raw aggression that the dagger system, for all its depth and all its complexity, really doesn't replicate. The new Katarina requires setup and planning. Old Katarina was just absolute chaos. Once you got that first reset, the correct thing to do was literally just mash your keyboard and hope no one CCs you. And some people just really enjoyed that, and how could they not? Let's be honest about something else here. People on average, I don't think were quite as good at League back then. In 2012, average players didn't have the mechanics, the gameplay knowledge, or the coordination to do what they do now. You see some clips from back in the day of Katarina where the opponent can clearly see them, they just walk into them and pentakill them. And back then there was a lot more point and click CC, such as Kassadin's Q used to silence or Warwick's ult used to be targeted. Back then people had more ways to shut Katarina down, they just weren't as good at doing it. Old Katarina could absolutely thrive through the chaos of bronze to platinum, through teams who didn't coordinate as well or just weren't ready for how fast she could sweep through your team. The 2016 rework made Katarina better in so many ways, more fair, more expressive, higher skill cap, but it also made her harder, more demanding and way less forgiving on mistakes. Katarina is always going to remain a polarizing champion, but she's also in many ways a better champion than she's ever been. She has some of the craziest itemization in the game, a high skill cap, and it feels super satisfying to really understand the champion. So what do you think? Did you play old Katarina back in the day, and which version? Do you miss the 2012 cleanup machine, or do you prefer the more refined 2016 dagger dancer? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.